For the last few days, the media has been hounding and going after Richard Dreyfuss hard. But has he really done something cancel-worthy, or are the cancel pigs spinning a false narrative? On Monday, May 27th, the entertainment media complex, perhaps inadvertently, joined in on the cancel train after they picked up the story of the Cabot Theatre in Massachusetts issuing an apology to its patrons who attended a special screening of Jaws, featuring special guest Richard Dreyfuss. This apology, obtained by The Hollywood Reporter, read, "We are aware of and share serious concerns following the recent event with Richard Dreyfuss prior to a screening of the film Jaws at the Cabot. The views expressed by Mr. Dreyfuss do not reflect the values of inclusivity and respect that we uphold as an organization. We deeply regret the distress that this has caused to many of our patrons. We regret that an event that was meant to be a conversation to celebrate an iconic movie instead became a platform for political views. We take full responsibility for the oversight in not anticipating the direction of the conversation and for the discomfort it caused to many patrons." The Hollywood Reporter then took to social media and specifically picked up on what those trying to cancel him were saying, writing, "The Oscar winner went on a free-form rant that, according to social media posts from those in attendance, began while he was speaking about Barbra Streisand and moved into his bigoted perspective on trans youth, the Academy Awards inclusion rules, and then on to trans kids affirming their gender." Following the event, attendees quickly took to social media to criticize the actor's remarks, with some saying they even walked out during the event. One attendee, an ex-user named Rogue Mama, wrote, "Came here to see if Richard Dreyfuss had been cancelled tonight after appearing at the Cabot in Beverly." Another suggested an alternative title for the night's event, "An Evening of Misogyny and Homophobia with Richard Dreyfuss." Disappointing doesn't even begin to cover it. So, already we see that the sources here are social media posts, and exclusively from those who are evidently quite passionate about LGBTQIAP+ activism, and quite a few of the allies and other assorted activists for that cause aren't too concerned with details like what actually happened or nuance. No, many of them tend to have the mindset that if you go against their cause in any way, shape or form, you must be destroyed. So keep that in mind as we move forward here. We are hearing from allies and activists. The story continues. One person wrote in the comment section of the venue's latest Facebook post, "We walked out of his interview tonight along with hundreds of others because of his racist, homophobic, misogynistic rant." Another person called Dreyfuss' comments disgusting and offensive. So, one person walked out with hundreds of others. Must have been an awfully big theater then, if hundreds walked out in disgust. That's a lot of activists in one screening of Jaws. The story then continues describing a video from the beginning of the event, and another video from the end of the event. But very strategically, there is no video from anything between, which is where the comments that the allies and activists found so cancel-worthy that they pressured the theater into apologizing would have been. But since there was no video to conclusively prove that Richard Dreyfuss did in fact say what the allies and activists are accusing him of having said, The Hollywood Reporter dug a bit deeper. Not into the validity of the accusations, mind you, but to find something, anything, to substantiate those accusations. What they found were more insinuations from other activists and allies. As the story continues, Dreyfuss appeared Friday at a similar event at the Cabot Q&A Plus screening at the Music Hall in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Attendees also criticized him for his conduct and language there, which was described as sexist and mean. In May 2023, while appearing on PBS, Dreyfuss made comments similar to those made at the Cabot regarding the Film Academy's inclusion rules. Here, let's do what the great journalist at the Hollywood Reporter did not, namely remind everyone of what those inclusion rules actually are, and they are so extreme that pretty much no previous Oscar winner would have qualified under them, and few future movies will either, unless they directly or indirectly are about racism, racial power dynamics, or are otherwise centered around minorities. The establishment publication Rolling Stone magazine did a pretty good breakdown of them, writing, in 2024, the Academy implemented a new rule. Films must complete a confidential representation and inclusion standards entry form that meets 2 of 4 standards in order to be eligible to be nominated. Standard A, on-screen representation, themes and narratives, must complete 1. One of the lead actors or significant supporting actors is from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 30% of actors in minor roles are from at least 2 underrepresented groups, including women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, the disabled. The main storyline, theme or narrative of the film is centered on at least one of the 4 aforementioned underrepresented groups. Standard B, creative leadership and project team, must complete 1. At least 2 of the following positions, casting director, cinematographer, composer, costume designer, director, editor, hairstylist, makeup artist, producer, production designer, set decorator, sound, VFX supervisor, writer, must be from one of the 4 underrepresented groups, and at least 1 must be from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 6 other crew/team members, excluding PAs, must be from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. At least 30% of the film's crew is from one of the 4 underrepresented groups. And it carries on like that. I'm not gonna read everything, but you get the gist. In order for a movie to qualify, there must be DEI across the board, on screen, behind the scenes, in the management team, and even among the distributors. That's right, the movie might be screwed if the distributor doesn't have sufficiently intrusive DEI policies. The story, narrative, casting and messaging should also be DEI through and through, or the movie is unlikely to qualify. That's what we're talking about here, and while the Hollywood Reporter did not, I think it's important to remind everyone of just how extensive the requirements are and how compromised any creative vision must be according to the new rules. So, now that we have established which draconian rules Dreyfuss is referring to, let's go back to the Hollywood Reporter and their write-up of what he said about them.
They make me vomit.
Why?
Because this is an art form. It's also a form of commerce, and it makes money, but it's an art. And no one should be telling me as an artist that I have to give in to the latest, most current idea of what morality is. And what are we risking? Are we really risking hurting people's feelings? You can't legislate that. And you have to let life be life. And I'm sorry, I don't think that there's a minority or a majority in the country that has to be catered to like that.
And with that, the reader is left to assume what a horrible person Dreyfuss must be, because the Hollywood Reporter were able to find even more examples of activists and allies being offended by his words. But what they did not find, however, outside of the quote pertaining to the Academy's inclusion rules, were any other direct quotes, let alone audio or video evidence. And without that, can we be sure that the activists and allies didn't exaggerate just a little bit in their retelling of events? Clearly, what was missing from the Hollywood Reporter write-up were any other accounts of what happened during that screening of Jaws, from someone who was in attendance. Luckily, we at Midnight Sedge do have some level of reach, and so we asked the members of our audience to please reach out if they either had been in attendance or knew someone that had been in our live stream of Wednesday, May 29th, and one viewer actually came through. SharkyPal26, whose real name is known to us, wrote, "Hi Midnight Sedge, long-time listener, first-time commenter. I'm reaching out because I was at the Richard Dreyfuss screening Saturday night and I wanted to offer my experience to the best of my memory. The show did open with him coming out in a dress. I'll admit I didn't understand what the joke or reference was, but the audience was 100% into it. Most of the interview was Richard going through his filmography and discussing the biggest moments of his career. There were no issues until he made a joke about working with Barbra Streisand. It was hard to hear since I was towards the back and the microphone was low. He said it was fun to tell her no on the set of the movie since others were too scared to." See, that's important. We don't know any further details about what was said exactly, but just from this, it would appear that Streisand was something of a nightmare to be around and a diva having everyone walking on eggshells around her. That would explain why Dreyfuss might not have gotten along with her, and here I think it's prudent to mention that the Barbra Streisand effect is indeed named after this very Barbra Streisand. Moving on with the report. He made a joke about saying no to women or not listening to women, and this triggered someone in the audience. A woman called out, "Excuse me?" And then Richard made a comment about how he disagrees with the modern-day LGBTQ movement. This caused some boos, and then he explained he didn't think a 10-year-old girl should be allowed to get gender reassignment surgery. This caused people to get up and walk out. It wasn't 100 like the article said, it was more like 20-30 people in a venue that seats roughly 500. The remainder of the interview was fine afterwards, until Richard was discussing having lunch with a Republican friend of his to discuss the Madoff film. At this point, the same woman from before, not sure why she didn't walk out with the others, yelled, "Who's this Republican friend of yours?" And here I'd like to chime in that reaction should say everything about the attitudes and worldview of this lady. Surprisingly, it was the audience that yelled back at this lady, saying things like, "Who cares?" and "It's nobody's business." I doubt that was covered in any of the articles. And again, I'd like to chime in that no, it wasn't. The narrative from the social media posts of people like this lady, and for all we know, that might actually include this lady herself, were simply accepted without question and without fact-checking. This tipster continues, "There were no other incidents after that, like you saw in the video. The audience that stayed was very enthusiastic and cheered for his message on civics in schools. I'm not here to pass judgment on Mr. Dreyfuss or the audience or the theater. I just wanted to tell the full story to the best of my memory and be as accurate and as fair as possible. Again, I was in the back, so I had trouble hearing at certain times. Other people near me were commenting that the mic was very low. The sad part is I saw Richard Dreyfuss about 9 years ago and he was much livelier than he was this time around. He appeared frail and had trouble projecting his voice. I'm worried that he will not make it to the 50th anniversary of Jaws. He was acting like his time left was short and he knows it. I just hope he is remembered for his body of work and not for his 2024 political views." Now this detailed report paints a very different picture than the angry and ranty social media retelling of events by activists and allies that the Hollywood Reporter ran with. That leaves the question though, is this report that was provided to us any more reliable than those? I would say so, because before making this video, we cross-referenced it with another recounting of events, this one from Paul Christine, a self-proclaimed Jaws fan who was in attendance, and who appeared on the Mike O'Mara show. And guess what? These independent reports from SharkyPal and Paul Christine line up perfectly with each other, and tell the same basic story, though they highlight different facets. In his report on the Mike O'Mara show, Paul Christine seemed to express that Richard Dreyfuss was saying that Barbara Streisand should learn to let the director direct, instead of by implication telling him how to do it. And here it would appear that Dreyfuss might have made some jokes that didn't land, and that could be construed as misogynistic in tone. He then continued that the interviewer then instantly pivoted after the Barbara Streisand story to asking him about the Me Too movement. And here it might be worth mentioning that Dreyfuss was Me Too'd himself at one point. And this is where the angry social media post the Hollywood Reporter referenced claims he went on an istaphobic rant about trans rights. But according to both SharkyPal and Paul Christine, he merely said he didn't think that 9-year-olds should be deciding their gender. So, of an audience of about 500, this is when roughly 20 to 30 audience members, meaning about 1/10 the number the activist claimed, expressed displeasure and walked out, one reportedly yelling, "Goodbye, Grandpa." According to both SharkyPal and Paul Christine, this is seemingly the only time though that we can confirm that Richard was political. From there, he continued to talk about his career until the end, which was recorded on video. Going back to the Hollywood Reporter, they concluded their piece, or rather hit piece, by grabbing social media quotes from Richard Dreyfuss' son, writing, "Ben Dreyfuss, one of the actor's 2 sons, tweeted on Monday night about his father's behavior in Beverly, jokingly writing regarding my father, 'Well, now you know why I refused to give him the password to his own Twitter account for a decade.' He later added, 'My dad and I disagree about lots of stuff, but it's a free country, people are allowed to have different opinions about stuff.' Note that by phrasing it this way, they furthered the impression of Richard Dreyfuss as a conservative istaphobe that can't be trusted with either a microphone or social media. Yet this impression was created by taking Ben Dreyfuss' comments completely and utterly out of context, which was made clear in the Daily Mail's write-up of events, where it was stated that Ben went even further to clarify his comments on his father's statements, saying the tabloids, probably a reference to the Hollywood Reporter, had lied about how he really felt. And you know what? They totally did. He concluded, "My dad is not the perfect guy. I know that better than anyone reading this, but I love him profoundly. Do not ask me to denounce him. I will not do it. I especially will not do it over thought crimes." And really, that I think is the bigger issue here. I see no evidence that Dreyfuss expressed anything other than views which were perfectly acceptable centrist views just a few years ago, but now to allies and activists. Those views are thought crimes, and anyone expressing them must be destroyed. Nuance or the facts of the situation be damned. Less than 5% of the audience walked out. To the rest, the event was by all accounts a success. But sadly, that was enough angry activists to force the Cabot Theatre into issuing a cowardly bullshit apology that should never have been issued in the first place, which in turn triggered this, I guess, hit piece in the Hollywood Reporter, from where it will be picked up by countless other outlets across the world, none of which will deliver the nuance and context needed to get a better understanding of the situation, as that would be journalism, and we can't have that. Not when there is a witch hunt to carry out. But will the readers fall for it, or see through the glaring errors in the reporting? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.